obviously contracted again in 2018, and did 2018, 19 and 20 here, going back and forth from New Zealand rugby. So yeah, that's kind of how I came. So came here on the back of a bit of disappointing news with the World Cup. But it's actually opened up the doors, not just for myself, but for people like Portia, and a lot of other Kiwis to come into this amazing club and this beautiful country.
Even back in 2017, why Japan though? I know with Porsche, for example, when you signed back end of last year, I think there'd already been a few people ahead of you, like your colleague next to you, Sarah Harini was at the club previously. There's a whole long list of New Zealand Black Ferns who have played in Japan by this point. But in 2017, why Japan then? Because I think even at that stage, I think the women's game was probably still in its infancy in terms of getting off the ground.
I just basically got shoulder tapped by one of the selectors in New Zealand to say, hey, there's an opportunity here. And the club was looking for a centre at the time. And yeah, I was available and I was like, yeah, nothing to lose. Took 6 weeks off of school at Manukura at the time, who actually were really helpful in letting me to allowing me to come into this space as well. So yeah, it was just an opportunity off the back of that disappointing news. So no real like, oh, I want to come to Japan. It was just an opportunity that came up at that time. And then obviously from that year, there's been huge growth, and huge exposure of the female game in Japan. And I think everyone's now wanting to, genuinely wanting to come here to have an experience. So yeah.
Is that how it played out for you, Portia? Because obviously you've had an incredible career, and I know post Olympics you hung up, you said, your international boots from sevens. So how did that door or the pathway open up to wanting to go to Japan? Because I think you've been in Japan before to play, obviously with the sevens, and I think from what I gathered, the sevens team has been in camp in Japan previously or had several trips there, and everyone seems to love the place.
Well, yeah. So leading into Tokyo Olympics, we had camps, we had tournaments here down in Kitakyushu, Fukuoka, like all of these amazing places. And right from our very first tournament, I loved Japan. The people, the kai, the food, the culture. I think there's a lot of similarities with the Japan culture and their belief system and how we would live in as Māori in New Zealand. So I think that's why I gravitated to Japan. And then obviously with Tokyo finished, heading into Paris, I'd already come to terms that I was going to retire. And so with that, I started having conversations with my manager. I was like, okay, I've always wanted to go to Japan. Sarah's had amazing things. Janna's there. Like you said, so many Black Ferns, so many New Zealand players have played in Japan and had amazing things to say about the country and the rugby and just being here. So that was like on the top of my list. Once announcing my retirement from New Zealand was, I want to play in Japan. How do we make this happen? And so lucky my cousin was here. So we started that conversation, and right from then was just like an opportunity, not just for myself, but for also my wife and my daughter. I really wanted them to experience the love that Japan has for their people, for their everything about Japan. So it was an opportunity we just couldn't take. And like having Janna here, having Sarah come here previously, Shakira Breaker to Vito, like these girls just had amazing things to say about the club. And yeah, once we got here and just hearing Janna speak Japanese, Māori, and English all in one sentence was inspiring. So you knew we are in the right place because of the people that are at the top.
You touched on something which I've read in a few interviews about perhaps the similarities in culture in Japan and Maori culture. And I'm not going to try and understand both because I'll be out of my depth. I've lived in New Zealand for a year. I visited Japan 2019 World Cup. But that community aspect, and I suppose that togetherness, I suppose. And like I said, you came over with your family. I think when Sarah Harini came over, she came with her partner as well. So it seems to be a bit of a trend that people do like to go there, obviously with some familiar faces. But now landing in Japan, there are so many New Zealanders in the men's and the women's game across the board. So I suppose it's a softer landing in terms of coming into that environment. I don't know if that's been the case for you, Portia.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we're very fortunate that English is a world spoken language, right? So wherever you go, nine times out of ten, you're going to have someone that can speak the language. And fortunately enough, my whanaunga here, my cousin, actually speaks both English and Japanese and Māori. So it makes it a lot easier. It also made me realize how hard it is for Japanese players when they come to New Zealand. Not everyone speaks Japanese and how isolating it can be. The girls that are here, the ones who speak Japanese, even the ones who don't speak Japanese, they're really, really supportive. And they just kind of hang around you and they support you in such amazing ways. And I think in terms of the Japanese culture and Māori culture, they're all about like what we call manaakitanga and supporting the person, helping them feel comfortable in their space, making them feel like they can be themselves. And I think those are the similarities that draw a lot of Māori people to the Japanese culture. They have a lot of, this is my limited experience of the Japanese culture. Obviously, Janna knows a lot more than me, but what I've noticed is that they have a lot of love for people and they love to support. So I've loved it here, and so does my wife, and even my daughter. Our daughter's 12. It's been hard for her because she's the only 12-year-old here. She's having lots of adult conversations as much as people try to come down to her level. She's having adult conversations around adults, but they just love her. The girls who can't speak Japanese are really, really amazing. She either gets chocolates, toys, or anything when she comes to training. So that's the manaakitanga, or the support that the Japanese culture has.
That cultural aspect for me is really fascinating because I think I've certainly seen some similarities in South Africa. My brief time in Fiji, I think if you drop a toddler or a kid in any of those environments, there's instant like aunties who are going to gravitate towards that. So it's great for parents, especially. So Janna, just anything you want to say about what Portia just said there that's maybe different or something you agree with in terms of those cultural aspects, and also from a coaching point of view where you've had to, I suppose, learn and adjust.
Yeah, just total support everything that Portia has said, and in her limited time, she's been able to pick up on these key things. I think a big thing, just to support what she said, is the community kind of value that's in Japan. So it's not me as a single person, it's us as a collective. And that's one of the biggest part of the Japanese cultures. We're not one, we're a collective of people. And so we act in ways that uphold the group as opposed to putting myself in front and trying to get ahead for myself. It's more about what is best for the collective. And that's what you do. And it's called atarimai. So just basically doing the most common, having common sense around doing what's right for the collective, which aligns with Te Ao Māori around, we live in, well, before colonization, we lived in hapu and iwi, where it was a community of people that were working together towards a common goal. We've gone away from that a little bit in New Zealand, which is really nice to be in Japan because it's refreshing that people can still live like that. So yeah. And then in terms of my coaching, obviously I was a player here for 3 years. And so my first year coming back in, there was, the club wasn't in the best position in terms of the way that they were playing, the way that they were interacting together. And so me coming back in, I had a few friends that were still in the group, which was a little bit hard to adjust to at the start. But once I drew the line and they knew that, at rugby, this is Coach Janna. After rugby, this is friend Janna, then that became a lot easier. And once we kind of got through a few bumps at the start, we're able to develop a really amazing culture. And obviously Sarah Hidney was here and loved it. Shakira Baker, all the Kiwis that come over have really loved the environment that we've been able to establish.
Just the two things to pick up there, I suppose, when you talked about the togetherness or the thinking broader picture, not about selfishness. I suppose that's hand in hand with what rugby should be about in terms of those core principles. Maybe again, in the real world, it's not always like that, but I suppose that goes hand in hand, which maybe is a nicer, seamless transition. Those overseas players you just mentioned coming in, because when I started first watching the Japanese women's game from afar, and it's still not always easy to get live streams of the fixtures, there were, I think, maybe more international players a few years ago. I think maybe the clubs are also going through a transition in terms of maybe in a good way promoting some of the Japanese talents, but also there's probably financial restrictions, etc. There's things happening behind the scenes. But the players that do come in from overseas, like you both have, and I'm sure like even your partner Portia or other people you know, language barriers aside, the rugby itself it, I think from overseas, there's a perception, at least, that Japanese rugby is fully professional and they're all fully paid. My understanding is that's not the case. So, how difficult is it to balance with the mixture of semi-pro players, pro players, Japanese players who maybe are starting, coming out of the college system? There seems to be so many things thrown into the mix that really would cause a lot of challenges for a coach or a player.
I
So, like,
think,
what?
sorry, what was that?
I was going to say how do you deal with that as a coach and as a mentor and as a friend for players who come into that environment? Because it's and again, these are just observations I made from afar. I've spoken to as many people as I can about the game, but there's probably more challenges than people think there are.
Mm.
Yeah, definitely. So the Japanese players, each club is associated with sponsors. Those sponsors employ the players.
Yeah.
Some clubs have more time off than others. So our players work until around 1 or 2, and then they're released to do rugby stuff. Um, I think for the Japan system, this is actually works well in terms of job security for them. So they're not on a professional contract, so they've got sustainability in their workplace and they can balance that with rugby. It does get hard for them at times. Their days are quite long. We start early in the morning with gym, they go to work, then we kick straight into our meetings, straight into training. So the day is long, but if we compare it to New Zealand, probably the system is actually a lot better than the New Zealand system in terms of sustainability. In terms of the players that come in from overseas, they're lucky and unlucky to be fully contracted. With that comes obviously performance pressure, performance reviews, and it's not sustainable longevity. So once they're in, it's like you're performing. If you're not, it's kind of cutthroat and you're gone, which is can be difficult. Because the Japanese players get attached to the gaijin, the foreign players, and they're here and then they're gone. And so the foreign players coming in and out is just so dynamic. But our girls are really good at adapting to change finally, which is not normally a Japanese thing. They hate change. But we've kind of been able to just explain that change is inevitable and people are going to come and go.
And I mean, those long days you talked about, I've read quite a few biographies recently over the holiday period, and Ruby Tui was one of them. There's a few other Sia Khaleesi's, but players 10 years ago, and I'm sure you both were in these positions, when you really wanted to make things work, you were getting up really early and fitting in those extra trainings and getting those extra jobs to make things work. I mean, the women's game, especially, as you both know, the last decade has come on a long way, although there is a long way to go. And this year, I don't know if it's going to be a breakwater year. There seems to be a lot of excitement about the women's game generally, and the Women's World Cup later this year will probably tell us more. But those sacrifices that players or coaches or people have to make in the game is still just part of the game, I think. I think that's a reality, right?
Yeah, definitely. And in the men's space, like they still have to sacrifice things as well. They're a lot further ahead than us, but they sacrifice time with their family, being far away. So it's just a different type of sacrifice in the women's game.
Let's get stuck into the nitty-gritty of the rugby then. So again, the women's 15 season in Japan, I think this is the 11th season. So again, it's still relatively new. You play in separate divisions. So you won your division, you won all the games. I watched the semi-final last week, which was a very close game for about 60 minutes, and then you pulled away in the end. And obviously, your rivals in the final next week are a team that you have a long rivalry with. I think the two teams played in the final last year, which Tokyo Sankyu Phoenix won. So there's a bit of history there, which for the neutrals like myself make it very interesting. In terms of the season, because I think you have to correct me if I'm wrong, there were 6 or 7 games in the division, and then obviously I think you had a break, then the semi-final. So how would you kind of look back, first of all, from a coach point of view, how would you look back at those divisional games and at semi-final as well?
Um, Looking back, obviously it's always hard coming out of our region and then into a semi-final with such a big jump. But in those early games, we just make sure that we stay disciplined and we keep our standards high for ourselves. We got some pretty good scores in our round robin games. I think we got our biggest score of all time, 159-0, I think was the score, and that's all we've had in our history. But we look back on the game and I come back into review, I'm like, girls, we won 159-0, but we're not perfect. Look at our errors, look at where we need a shift. So in the early stages, we are happy with, getting the win in that, but we're just looking at how we can be critical across those games, because we know that when we come to the semi, it's a huge jump, and Portia can kind of talk about this. The speed, the level of contact is just, probably double.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, also
Yeah.
you were squaring up against. I'm assuming you know her, but you were squaring up against another Black Fern in the midfield, and that little contest in the greater picture of the context was interesting to watch from a fan's media point of view. So, but that game, like I didn't watch any of the divisional games because there was no stream, to be honest. But that semi-final was a good game. It was a semi-final in the truest sense of it being, I sense, quite nervy from both sides, maybe knowing what was at stake. But big collisions, big hits, big runs. And I mean, a lot of the Japanese players really impressed. I know the Sakura team was announced this week, and I think there's 6 or 7 players from your club who have been selected for that initial training squad. So obviously, their eyes down the line would be hoping to go to that World Cup. Finals time next week. Not focusing so much on Phoenix for now, but in terms of where you're at and in terms of where your confidence going into that game, how are you feeling and how is the squad kind of preparing this coming week? Because you got what's next week, Sunday, I think, is the final.
Yeah, so this week's been about just getting in some good recovery for the girls. Obviously, huge step up in contact, a few niggly bodies. So yeah, just kind of ticking those boxes this week, but making sure that we've got intentional across what we're doing on the park as well. And then heading into next week, looking back on our stats and looking back at the footage, like we left, at least 3, 4 tries out there. And so we weren't perfect by any means, which is exciting because we still have more in us. And if we turn up on the day with belief and the ability to execute, then we'll run away with the final. But I think where we kind of fell short last year was a little bit of belief, a little bit of experience. We didn't have Sania, our captain. She went to New Zealand with the Chiefs, so she missed our final, which was a huge blow in terms of game control, the ability just to calm the girls down. So we've got her this year. Obviously we've got Portia and her power, her speed, and her experience as well. So pretty confident in terms of a coach going into that. But we're going to do all we can to make sure that we prepare and leave nothing to chance, is what I'll say to the girls. Hey, we've got to do everything, leave nothing to chance. If we turn up with confidence and execute our core roles and the game plan that the coaches will put together, we'll get the result that we deserve, really.
Push from a player's point of view, stepping into the environment. I think you arrived in Japan maybe October, November last year. It's quite a short, compacted season, but I suppose it means you're straight away into the mix. How did you find that adjustment, playing I suppose, the Me Pearls way, and also just adjusting to, new calls, new teammates, etc., and kind of going through that divisional rounds before you hit that semi-final last week?
Yeah, getting into the country, like I knew I was gonna start right from the get-go, and it was about coming in with an open mind and being really conscious of how they do things. Like I'm not the type of person that's going to come in and say my way and do it all this sort of stuff. That's definitely not me. So the first couple of weeks was definitely feel my way through the group and listen to the playmakers, the leaders, and watch them and how they do it. And the cool thing is they're very supportive. They wanted me to get straight into some playmaking roles, and that's not me. So the coolest part is they're really supportive, and that was amazing. The hard part is obviously the language barrier and just small communication that you want to say on the field, like I've got your inside, or just wanting to have these little moments. It was hard at the start, and as we've progressed throughout the division and throughout the Kansai tournament, I was able to pick up on small words. Mate mate means to hold, like lots of different words that I love, but being able to pick up. And the girls are really, what is it? They really support me in that I don't quite have the language, but they're going to give me as much as they can. And going through each game throughout the Kansai tournament was really cool because Janna and Pango, they were able to create a playbook that was really supportive of the girls' skill sets and abilities, and it was progressing throughout the year or throughout the tournament. By the time we got to that last game against University, I felt like our girls had really built some confidence, some belief. They knew their role, they knew their strengths. So that game was really, really amazing. And to finish on that game, heading into Christmas, New Year's was really, really cool. And I think that's the hard part too, is you have a 2-week break, 2 weeks training, and then you go into one of your hardest games and a do or die game. So that's one thing that I had to learn about as well. And it was hard coming back from a holiday into that pressure moment training. So I think we did well. And I think, like Janna said, was if we can have the belief in our own strength and our own abilities, skill set, and knowledge, we can take on anyone. We have some amazing players that come from the Sakura 15s team, Seina, Kyoko, Wako, even some young development players, Soyoka, Ayano. These players have some amazing knowledge. And as long as they believe that they are good enough and they're meant to be there, then they can produce some amazing rugby. So heading into this final, like Janna said, it's all about the belief. We can't change much. We've got a week left. And this week isn't going to be about coming up with some amazing move that's going to trick, Tokyo Phoenix. It's about believing in ourselves and doing everything we can so that we step onto that field and there's absolute confidence. And it's not necessarily confidence that we're going to beat them. It's just confidence in our own ability. That the result will come when you have that confidence.
The one thing I want to pick up there is I know language barriers would be a logical obstacle when you came into that team, but with your experience, and I imagine even when you play with the Black Ferns 7s and 15s, you're an experienced head that I imagine would speak to teammates and be able to calm situations or have your inputs. How much can you do that, even via Janna or other people? Because when you're on the field, there's no one on the outside that can help you. You have to make things happen or communicate. Like, have you found that you have been able to mentor the players to a degree on the field as much as around the training sessions, etc.?
To a certain degree, and obviously throughout the Kansai tournament, it was hard to find my place in that. And each game, I kind of learnt who the people are that I can communicate to and they can pass on messages. Saina is definitely one of them. She has a good understanding of English and she has that leadership role where I can be like, Saina, I think we need to just do a little bit more this, or we need to hold on to our ball, carry our ball. She already knows this as well, and I want to be able to support her. So I definitely latch on to certain people that I know can understand understand English a bit more. But there's also been moments like in the semi-final, I was like, girls, this is our game. Have the belief. And they, within themselves, whoever can translate will translate. And it kind of helps me be able to be like, this is my chance to help wherever I can. And the girls are supportive as well. So it definitely took time to understand when and how I can do it. But latching onto certain people and them also giving me, like, allowing me to do that in those moments. So yeah.
And I suppose worst case as well, actions speak louder than words because you had a lot of big carries and big runs in that semi-final specifically. So I mean, when the language gets in the way, rugby is the one sport where you can still show by your actions, right? And I think that can motivate players or lift players up in those key moments because that semi-final like I said, it was nervy till that last 15 minutes when you broke away and scored a couple of late tries. But it was a good contest from what I could see, and especially that midfield battle, like I said, was very interesting. I know the two players in the team that you beat, the TKM team. I forgot their names now. The Samoan Caps International. I think they've already. And the club's
Yes.
already announced they're departing the club. Yeah. So again, that's what you talked about in terms of players coming and leaving. That's a good example where they've come in for that 15 season. I know there's one final to go, and then Japan clubs turn their attention towards the seventh season. So lots of things to adjust to, I suppose. In terms of that final next Sunday, because I think it used to be, I don't know what's happened to them, but like Nagato, Blue Angels, Prism, I think they've had to play in these mixed teams this season. But then Me Pearls and Phoenix have kind of been leading the way the last few years in terms of Japanese women's rugby. And even when I spoke to Seherini, was either the Cape Town or the Dubai Sevens earlier this season, and she was speaking highly about the Japanese women's game. And like you both said, she thinks it's far ahead of where New Zealand structures are in terms of women's rugby, and potentially she'll be back in Japan in the future. Who knows? But how much have you seen the women's game generally develop from a New Zealand perspective, and then maybe for Janna that from a Japanese perspective over the last few seasons? Because, like I said, there is a lot of talk this year about the growth and development of the women's game, and it's in the spotlight more than ever because of people like Alona Mar, because of the World Cup, and it's just more visibility, which is a good thing for the game, right?
Yeah,
So,
so in terms of the development, because there has been such a saturation of the foreign players into the market and foreign coaches into the Japanese market, and the investment from Japan, not necessarily Japan Rugby Union, but the companies within Japan. This is where I think they've got it right, is they're investing in the game at a club level. This would be like probably like an FPC level in New Zealand, where companies are investing and you're seeing the growth because of the investment. I think in New Zealand, it's kind of the other way around. It's like we are trying to, yeah, we're not really investing a lot. And so therefore there's not a lot of growth. So, but the growth that we're seeing now, like you said, has been over a period of time. So from when I came, more money invested, more companies, which means more players coming, more foreign coaches coming, which then give the knowledge base for the Japanese players to grow.
how do you start, or how do you identify pathway developments? Because I think that the boys or the men's setup is a little bit better in Japan in terms of the school, university to clubs. I don't know if there's as strong a structure for the girls and the women's game. So how do you identify pathways in terms of attracting young Japanese players to come play for Me Pearls?
So it is similar. It's just not as big, I suppose. So we are attached to a school here, Maryknoll High School. So we have there are junior pearls. Some of them will go to university away and play for teams there. Others will come straight into our program. So we've got two that have come into our program this season. And then we recruit from the university. So it's the same as the men, just not on a smaller scale. So we look at Nita University, Nikkei University, Venus. So that's where we kind of do our recruiting from. So there are pathways. Yeah, like I said, just not as, I suppose, prominent as the men.
And then there's also those international partnerships because Japan with New Zealand and Japan with Australia have definitely forged closer ties over the last few years. And I've seen that in the women's game. But I think your club has partnerships with one of the New Zealand teams. I know the Phoenix has similar arrangements with New Zealand and Australia. So do those pathways, and does it also mean there's more opportunities for Japanese players to play overseas more regularly? I know that I've read different conversations about, it could be an ideal setup where maybe New Zealand players and their off season are in Japan, and you play the short season, head back to New Zealand to play, Super Rugby or whatever there may be in terms of the Palmer Cup. There's different tournaments going on, but I suppose aligning that calendar is maybe a bit of a challenge. But do you think there's more opportunities for those Japanese players to go play overseas?
Yeah, definitely. So We obviously have a partnership at the moment with the Chiefs, but within our preseason, we actually had a game with the Force, which then opened up a door. One of our players has been contracted with the Force for this upcoming season. And then obviously our Sakura 15s members have made themselves unavailable for Super Aupiki and Super Rugby in Australia. If they were available, those opportunities definitely would be there because clubs are, reaching out to Japanese clubs to say, hey, have you got, especially around like because our tight five are quite mobile. They've got good size and they're mobile, which is hard to find in New Zealand and Australia. So definitely has opened up the doors for the Japanese players to go into those environments. So after our 15 season, we go straight into a 7 season. And the 15s players are kind of like, oh, I don't do sevens training. So it's a really good period for them just to pop overseas for a few months to get in some Super Rugby before coming back and settling into the club stuff again.
And for you, Portia, because you've played against Sakura 7s and 15 sides over the years, one of the things that always has irritated me, there's a general, again, misconception about Asian and Japanese players being too small, etc. But I mean, the skill sets and the fitness levels and even the rugby IQ of a lot of the Japanese players, I think, often surprises teams that take them for granted. Having played with and against them over these years, where do you kind of rank their strengths? I know it's a bit of a generalization, but in terms of your teammates, for example, now at Me Pearls, where do you see the strong attributes of those Japanese players? And are there any players you want to pick out in terms of where you see a really bright future for them?
Oh, the Japanese players, I think not even just here at Mia Pills, but throughout the country, they're like you said, their work ethic is amazing. They're fit and they're fast. And some of the girls in our squad have definitely, oh man, I would love to see them in Opaki. And they've dusted me up on the field. The contact is brutal. Like I'm coming away a couple times. I'm like, did I just get concussed from that tackle? Like, what is going on? So the contact is amazing. It's really, really hard, and it's to be honest, they have no fear, and that's what kind of comes across in the game and in trainings. So they're fearless in their contact. They're fit. They're fast, and their IQ is really, really on. So. Like you say, there's a definitely misconception around the game here and around their skill set. Even if you go back to Global Sevens in New Zealand, Japan Sevens have been in the top of that competition for the last couple of years. They don't get there by pure mistake. They're there because they deserve it and they're amazing players. So that development is definitely coming through in their senior players. Playing alongside our girls, there's definitely a few of the younger girls that aren't quite in the Sakura's full team, but I'd love to see them in Opaki because their skill set, their abilities are just, I haven't seen them. And the work rate that they have, sometimes I need to tell them to like, it's okay, you can laugh. It doesn't have to be so serious. But they're really, really amazing. And so I'd love to see some of the young girls come through, the ones who probably don't believe in themselves as much. I would love for them to come through just to kind of boost their confidence and then to see that they actually do compare to some of the best players in the world in New Zealand. So yeah, no, the skill set, the knowledge, the work rate is beyond anything I've ever seen.
Any players that you want to name and identify, and not in terms of young talent that we should keep an eye on?
Ayano, Soyoka, who else? Saya. There's a few that have just been new into the Sakura team, but Saya, Sachiko, these players are like quiet, right? Like really soft-hearted. They look like butterflies, but on the field, they are brutal. So they're really strong, really skillful. Like Soyoka, her skill set and knowledge of the game and where to run is really, really amazing. Ayano has a right hand, left hand pass like Pungle does or like Janna does. You think that she's grown up in New Zealand just chucking the ball around. So yeah, those are the 4 players that I'd love to see have a crack at Opaki, pretty much to boost their confidence and be like, you guys compared on the net, you compared to some of the amazing players in New Zealand.
Nice tips. I'll have to keep an eye on them for next weekend's game, which I hope is streamed, but it should be, I hope. Just the last question for both of you, just again, I know we look macro big picture in terms of where the women's game is globally. I mean, I was looking at all the new competitions even, and some of the competitions you guys have mentioned. I mean, in the US, you already have the sevens program, but they're launching a 15s league this year. India is meant to launch a Pro Sevens league in September. You've got the Women's World Cup later this year, which might be disruptive for all these players looking at the different options. You still have the sevens and the Challenger Series sevens. There's so much going on for the men's and the women's game. But where would you each individually like to see the biggest next leap of development for the women's game, whether that be visibility, funding, accessibility? Where do you think the biggest challenge is at the moment?
For me, it's probably just investment. I think growth will come through investment and people just generally wanting to support the game. And they've got that here in Japan. So I'd like to see that in more places. New Zealand would be nice.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They've got a lot to learn, I think. Like I think they take it for granted that New Zealand rugby are good rugby players, but it's not always going to be the case. And you can see it already that the countries are supporting their women's players and that growth is happening. So yeah, definitely investment. There's back home, like there's a bit of a gap between high school or for sevens, there's no real clear development pathway for that. So I'd love to see that cleared up. And then also the development from high school through to the next women's grade, like there's quite a big gap there. And in the past we've had like under 18s head to the Youth Olympics. I'd love to see under 18s women's Black Ferns teams happening more, like that kind of development, because it's a big jump. And if you're 22 even, you kind of miss out on like school grades. You don't quite get into that next grade. You're kind of missed out sometimes. And that's where we kind of miss a lot of players, and they come to Japan and we don't see them for a good couple of years. So definitely just the development and investment to create that pathway a bit clearer.
And last question, what is the future for you, Portia, after you play that final and potentially win another trophy, but this time in Japan? What is the future like for you after Japan?
I get back to New Zealand on the 4th and I go into Blues camp on the 6th. So I'm straight back into it. I'm looking forward to playing Super Rugby Opiki. And then from there, a little unsure, trying to pick up a few different opportunities. But the cool part is there's so many. Like you mentioned, there's the USA competition, there's coming back to Japan. Like there's so many different opportunities that we never had 10 years ago. So my world's my oyster. I just got to figure out which one I want.
Perfect. Thank you very much, both of you, for your time this morning, and good luck in that final next week.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Ka kite.
Bye bye.